We stopped.
As we came to a stop, suddenly we were under very, very intense heavy machine gun fire. The guard car in front of me was hit. We lost a sergeant of my guard and about 4 wounded. Everyone jumped out of my car and yelled at me to do the same.
We could see the bullets from those heavy machine guns coming down at us, hitting the asphalt, the tarmac around us. It was like raindrops on a parched land, just making holes. And those rows of holes were getting closer and closer to where we were standing.
I felt very angry. And I believe my reaction was to say a bad word, but essentially to the effect of, how dare they?
The king jumped into a ditch.
Spontaneously, on the spur of the moment, I had an idea to protect His Majesty physically, and the commander of the guards had the same idea at the same time.
They converged from both sides to try to give me body cover, and they nearly broke my back in the process.
Their driver turned the car around.
We got into the car, shooting going on. Engine was revving like mad, but we were still stationary. So I told the driver just to hang on a second and engage the gear, which in his anxiety he had forgotten to do, and we shot off.
The faction most determined to overthrow the government of Jordan was led by George Habash.
All we wanted to do was to fight against Israel. But the Jordanian regime saw us as a danger or a threat. This was their problem, not ours.
Dr. Habash was the leader of a political party, and they decided to remove King Hussein. But from our point of view, we don't like to fight against the government, but if they are insisting to clash, we will fight.
On September 9th, 1970, this British airliner with 115 passengers and some of Dr. Habash's armed men aboard appeared over Amman.
I heard about it when an aircraft passed overhead my house west of the city in the suburbs, practically knocking the roof off.
In a single spectacular operation, Habash's men hijacked 4 Western airliners and forced 3 of them to fly to Jordan with their hundreds of passengers. The planes landed on an old World War II airstrip in the desert.
We waited for 20 full years. Nothing happened. Our people remained in their camps, in their tents. They are fed up with this condition.
We thought that the way to attract the world's attention to our cause was to hijack planes.
The Jordanian army surrounded the airstrip, and the general in charge went in to negotiate with the hijackers.
We spoke for hours. It was terribly hot. I stayed in the shade of the aircraft. I made a deal with them. We take the passengers, they keep the planes.
435 passengers and crew were taken off the aircraft, but some were kept as hostages.
The humiliation of having aircraft flown into the country and innocent passengers being whisked away and being unable to do anything about it was something that questioned whether Jordan really existed or whether it didn't.
The hijackers then drove home their message to the world.
Well, that was the limit. As far as I was concerned, something had to be done, and done soon.
4 days later, with control of the kingdom slipping away, King Hussein declared war on the PLO. That day, Jordanian tanks and soldiers moved into position around the capital. Arab was poised to fight Arab.
I think I tried to get a little bit of sleep that night. I prayed a lot. And in the morning, first light, there was movement into the city.
On the early hours of September 17, I woke up when we heard the artillery bombing our bases. So what we did immediately is that we went to Arafat office, the Joint Command. Arafat was there. Most of the leaders of Fatah were there. Even Habash was there, and they were calling through telephone and through wireless Damascus, telling them about the news and asking in an open way for a Syrian intervention.
On the third day of fierce fighting, the Syrians responded.
Our intelligence and our radar informed us that the Syrians were massing tank formations on the Jordanian-Syrian border.
We had been arguing over this Syrian invasion, particularly with our Soviet friends at the time. And whenever I raised the problem with the Soviet ambassador, he would respond, but these are Palestinian army units and Palestinian army tanks, they are not Syrian.
And we all knew that the PLO does not have tanks.
But there were tanks, Soviet-built ones, streaming in from Syria.
We were just protecting the Palestinians from the army of Jordan. Our purpose wasn't really to attack the Jordanians. It was a limited intervention on the smallest possible scale. All we wanted to do was support and protect the Palestinian fighters.
In Washington, President Nixon called in his national security advisors to assess the reports from Jordan.
The Soviets were on every platoon leader's tank right up to the border and then jumped off as they crossed the border. And Syrian officers were in command of what were allegedly PLO volunteer forces. So we knew it was an international superpower crisis.
The president summoned the Soviet ambassador.
We warned the Russians and said, stay out of there. They, of course, in turn warned us and said, you stay out and keep Israel out.
In the meantime, King Hussein's forces had destroyed many of the Syrian tanks, but they could not stop the advance. The pressure on the king was increasing by the hour.
When the Syrian tanks had reached the town of Irbid, which is about 2/3 of the way from the Syrian border down to Amman. They're about at that town, on the edge of it. That's when he was really starting to panic.
With all the threats from almost every direction, and the situation, to all intents and purposes, looking almost impossible to cope with. Army headquarters began to tell me that we needed help from outside, and we should ask for it from the Americans and any quarter that would be willing to help.
In these circumstances, any quarter could mean only one thing: Israel.
We knew that he had said he would accept help from any quarter, and we thought he'd probably prefer direct American intervention.
He was keenly aware that if he was resurrected and protected as a result of Israeli military intervention, that this would have a strongly negative impact, not only within Jordan itself, but obviously within the entire world.
This was something that was discussed between Cisco, myself, Haig, and one or two of my staff people.
The advisors knew that President Nixon would have to be informed about the situation right away.
I first had to find him, and the Secret Service told me he was in the basement of the Executive Office building across the street from the White House.